Poor cleaner claims she can deliver millionaire's wife's quintuplets, then she grabs a kitchen knife, and minutes later. Comment with a rating from 0 to 10 for my story. Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The rain lashed against the windows of the mansion with incredible force, while the 30-year-old housekeeper wiped the mahogany desk in the main study. Her hands, calloused from hard work, trembled slightly, not from the cold that invaded the luxurious room, but from the tension that had hung in the air for weeks. Her boss had been different, more distant, more worried, and she knew something was about to happen. The sound of her footsteps echoed through the marble hallway when a desperate scream cut through the silence of the night. It came from upstairs, from the master bedroom, a sound that made her blood run cold. She dropped the bucket on the floor, the water spreading across the polished tiles, and ran towards the stairs. Her bare feet slipped on the wet floor as she climbed the steps 2 at a time. The 30-year-old millionaire appeared at the top of the staircase, his perfectly styled hair now disheveled, his expensive dress shirt crumpled and stained with sweat. His eyes, always so controlled and confident, were filled with panic. He looked at her as if it were the first time he had really seen her, not just as another invisible employee in his house. "She's in labor," he said, his voice thick with emotion, the words tumbling out. "The phones are down because of the storm. The roads are blocked by fallen trees. I can't get to the hospital." The housekeeper felt her heart race. She knew this situation. She had experienced similar moments in her humble community where medical resources were scarce and women depended on each other to survive the most difficult births. But here, in that mansion, surrounded by all the luxury money could buy, the same human vulnerability manifested itself. "How far along is she?" she asked, already climbing the stairs towards the bedroom. 7.5 months, he replied, following her closely. "It's 5 babies. The doctors said it would be a high-risk pregnancy, but we never imagined that." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The housekeeper pushed open the bedroom door and was faced with a scene that immediately transported her back to the shacks of her childhood. The millionaire's wife, a stylish 28-year-old woman who had always treated her with polite indifference, was lying on the king-size bed, her pale face contorted in pain, her hands gripping the silk sheets as if they were her only anchor in reality. "Please," whispered the woman when she saw her enter, "help me." The housekeeper approached the bed, her trembling hands touching her boss's sweaty forehead. She knew the signs. She had witnessed dozens of births in her community, where midwives were ordinary women who had learned out of necessity. But this was different. 5 premature babies on a stormy night without medical equipment. "I need clean towels, boiling water, and rubbing alcohol," she said, her voice taking on a firmness that surprised even herself, "and a very sharp knife that we can sterilize." The millionaire looked at her suspiciously. "Do you know what you're doing?" "I know enough to try and save your wife and your children," she replied, already taking off her shoes and rolling up the sleeves of her simple blouse. "But you need to trust me." It was then that the first really strong contraction hit the woman in the bed. Her scream echoed through the mansion, mingling with the sound of the rain that continued to batter the windows. The housekeeper saw the fear in the powerful man's eyes, a fear she knew well, the fear of losing someone you love. For the next 2 hours, she worked with hands that knew only brooms and cleaning cloths, but which now moved with the precision of someone fighting for life. The first baby was born small and purple, but breathing. The second came soon after, followed by the third. With each birth, she felt the millionaire's gaze on her, no longer the disdainful look of a boss towards an employee, but the grateful look of a desperate man. The 4th baby took longer to arrive, and when he was finally born, he didn't cry immediately. The housekeeper worked in silence, clearing his airways with the delicacy she had learned by watching other women in her community. When the crying finally came, weak but present, she felt tears roll down her face. The fifth baby was the most difficult. The mother was exhausted, losing blood, and the housekeeper knew she was at the limit of her knowledge. It was then that she looked at the millionaire and saw something she never expected to see. He was crying, tears streaming down his face as he held his wife's hand. "She's going to be okay," the housekeeper said, but she wasn't sure if she was talking to him or to herself. When the last baby was finally born, small and fragile like the others, but alive, the storm began to subside outside. The housekeeper looked at the 5 little beings she had helped bring into the world and felt something changing inside her. She was no longer just an employee in that house. She had become part of something much bigger. The millionaire approached her, his expensive clothes stained with blood and sweat. "Thank you," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "You saved my family." She looked him in the eyes for the first time directly, without lowering her gaze as she always did. "I just did what anyone would do." "No," he shook his head, "you did much more than that." At that moment, as the 5 babies slept side by side in makeshift beds made of soft towels, something passed between them, a mutual recognition, a respect that didn't exist before. She saw in him not the arrogant millionaire who had amassed his fortune by exploiting others, but a vulnerable man who had just discovered what really mattered in life. But what she didn't know was that that night would mark the beginning of something that would change their lives forever, something that would test all the social and moral boundaries they knew, and that the storm outside was just the prelude to a much bigger storm that was coming into their lives. 3 weeks had passed since that stormy night, but the housekeeper still felt her hands tremble every time she entered the master bedroom. The millionaire's wife was recovering slowly, still weak and pale, but the 5 babies were growing with surprising strength. What she didn't expect was how her routine had completely changed. Now, in addition to cleaning the house, she had become a kind of unofficial assistant in caring for the newborns. The millionaire had insisted, against all the social protocols of his class. She arrived every morning at 5 o'clock and only left after midnight, exhausted, but with a strange sense of belonging that she had never experienced. It was during these long hours that she began to notice details about the boss that had gone unnoticed during years of silent work. The way he held each baby with excessive care, as if he were going to break them. How his eyes filled with tears every time one of them cried. How he spoke softly to them during the early hours of the morning, telling stories about the business empire he had built, as if he wanted to prepare them from now on to inherit his fortune. But there was something more, something she tried to ignore, but that was becoming increasingly difficult to deny. The way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching. How their conversations, which always started about the babies, stretched for hours in the early hours of the morning when his wife was asleep. How he seemed genuinely interested in her life, asking questions that no rich boss would ever ask a poor employee. "Do you have family?" he asked one of those nights while she was organizing his wife's medication on the marble dresser. "I have a mother," she replied without raising her eyes. "She works in 3 family homes to pay the rent for our shack." "And your father?" She paused, her hands trembling slightly over the vitamin bottle. "Never met him. My mother said he was married, that he promised to come back and get us, but he never came back," he completed, his voice softer than she had ever heard. "Never came back," she confirmed, finally facing him. "That's why I learned early on that rich men make promises they don't intend to keep." Something changed in his face at that moment. A shadow of pain passed through his eyes, as if she had touched a wound he was trying to hide. "Not all of us are the same," he said softly. "No?" she questioned, a pang of bitterness in her voice. "Then tell me, how many women like me have you had in your life? How many promises have you made that you haven't kept?" He was silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the marble floor. When he finally spoke, his voice was filled with a sadness she didn't expect. "My first wife died in a car accident 5 years ago. She was pregnant with our first child. The revelation hit her like a punch in the stomach. Suddenly, a lot of things began to make sense. The distant way he treated his current wife, as if he were always physically present, but emotionally absent. The way he seemed lost, even with all that wealth around him. This marriage, he continued, gesturing vaguely towards the room where his wife was sleeping, was arranged by the families. A business deal disguised as romance. She knows that, I know that. But we needed heirs, and she needed financial security. And love? She asked, the question coming out before she could control herself. Where does love fit into all this? He looked her directly in the eyes then, and she saw something there that made her tremble inside, an intensity that had nothing to do with business or family agreements. Love, he said slowly, sometimes appears when we least expect it, in the most unlikely places. With the people we never imagined. Her heart raced. There was something in the way he said those words, in the way he looked at her, that made every nerve ending in her body light up. She knew she was treading on dangerous ground, but she couldn't walk away. "This is dangerous," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I know," he replied, taking a step closer. "But sometimes danger is the only thing that makes us feel truly alive." It was at this moment that they heard footsteps in the hallway. They quickly moved away from each other, she returning to organizing the medication with trembling hands, he pretending to check if the babies were sleeping. The mansion's housekeeper entered the room, a 60-year-old woman who had worked for the family for decades. "Sorry to interrupt," she said in a tone that suggested she didn't believe she had only interrupted a conversation about work. "But some of the other employees are commenting on the extra time you've been spending here together." The housekeeper felt her blood run cold. She knew that tone. She had grown up listening to malicious gossip that destroyed reputations and lives in her community. "We're just taking care of the babies," she said quickly. "Of course," the housekeeper smiled coldly. "But perhaps it would be better if this care were done at more appropriate times, with more people around." The millionaire turned to the older woman, and for the first time since the housekeeper had met him, she saw his ruthless side, the one that had built a business empire. "The care of my children will be done in the way I decide," he said in a voice as cutting as ice. "And if anyone has a problem with that, they can find another job." The housekeeper recoiled, but her eyes remained defiant. "I understand, sir. But perhaps it would be prudent to consider what kind of example we want to set for the children when they grow up." After the woman left, a heavy silence settled in the room. The housekeeper knew that her life had changed forever. The rumors were already starting, and in a house full of employees, secrets had a life of their own. "Maybe she's right," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe I should look for another job." "No." His answer came quickly and firmly. "You're not going anywhere. These babies need you." He stopped, the words dying in his throat, but she knew what he was going to say. She felt it too, that impossible connection, that attraction that grew with each day, each conversation, each stolen glance. "This is crazy," she said, running her hands through her hair. "We're from completely different worlds. You have a wife, 5 children, a company to take care of. I'm just a poor housekeeper who doesn't even have a roof over her head." "What if I didn't care about any of that?" he asked, taking a step towards her. "What if I was willing to give it all up?" "Then you'd be a fool," she replied, but her voice betrayed the inner conflict she felt. "Because men like you don't give up their lives of luxury for women like me. That only happens in the movies." At that moment, one of the babies started to cry, breaking the tension of the moment. They moved instinctively, working in sync to calm the child, their hands touching accidentally in the process. The touch lasted only a second, but it was enough to make her heart race again. When the baby finally calmed down, she realized that he hadn't taken his eyes off her the whole time. There was something in that look that made her feel things she had never experienced, a mixture of desire, protection, and something deeper that she couldn't name. "I need to go," she said abruptly, grabbing her old purse. My mother gets worried when I get home too late. He didn't try to stop her, but when she reached the door, she heard his voice behind her. Tomorrow, when you come back, things are going to be different. I can't keep pretending I don't feel what I'm feeling. She turned to look at him one last time, and what she saw in his eyes made her tremble. It was the promise of something that would change their lives forever, for better or worse. The housekeeper arrived the next morning with her heart pounding. She had spent the entire night unable to sleep, tossing and turning in the narrow bed she shared with her mother in the small room they rented in the back of a house on the outskirts. Every word the millionaire had said echoed in her mind. Every glance they exchanged repeated itself like a movie she couldn't stop. When she entered through the back door of the mansion, as she always did, she found the kitchen in total silence. It was strange, as normally the other employees would already be preparing breakfast at this hour. It was then that she noticed the presence of the housekeeper sitting at the main table, with a steaming cup of coffee in her hands and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Good morning," said the older woman, but her tone was anything but welcoming. "Sit down. We need to talk." The housekeeper hesitated, but sat down in the indicated chair. She knew that this conversation wouldn't be about work hours or housework. There was something in the air that made her feel like prey, being watched by a predator. "Do you know how many years I've worked for this family?" asked the housekeeper, slowly stirring sugar into her coffee. "I don't know," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. 22 years. I saw his first marriage. I saw the tragedy that destroyed his life. I saw him rebuild himself and accept this second marriage. And in all these years, I've never seen a simple employee cause so much commotion. The word was said with disdain, as if it was something dirty. The housekeeper felt her cheeks flush, but she kept her gaze steady. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Of course you do." The housekeeper leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with a cruel malice. "You think you're clever, don't you? A poor thing who's figured out how to mess with a rich man's head. But I know women like you. Women like me." Anger began to boil inside her. Opportunists, calculators, who use their own poverty as bait to fish for men who can give them a better life. The housekeeper smiled coldly. "But there's something you don't know about our boss, something that might change your perspective on this romantic fantasy you're feeding." The housekeeper felt a chill in her stomach, but she said nothing. "He killed his first wife." The words came out like a slap. The housekeeper stood up abruptly from the chair, her heart racing. "That's a lie. They were arguing in the car that day. She had found out that he had other women, several others. Poor ones like you. He's always had a thing for vulnerable women." The housekeeper stood up too, approaching slowly. The argument was so intense that he lost control of the steering wheel. The car hit a tree. She died instantly, along with the baby she was expecting. "You're lying," whispered the housekeeper, but her voice betrayed the doubt that was beginning to set in. "Am I? Then why do you think his family arranged this second marriage so quickly? Why do you think he agrees to live without love? It's guilt, my dear, guilt and fear of hurting someone again." At that moment they heard footsteps approaching. The millionaire entered the kitchen wearing an impeccable suit, his hair perfectly styled. When he saw the two women there, a strange expression passed over his face. "Good morning," he said, looking directly at the housekeeper. "I hope you've had a clarifying conversation." The housekeeper smiled. "Very clarifying, sir. I was just telling our employee about the importance of staying within the appropriate boundaries." "I see." He approached, took an apple from the fruit bowl, and bit into it slowly, his eyes never leaving the housekeeper's face. "And what boundaries would those be?" "The boundaries between bosses and employees, of course." The answer came too quickly, revealing the older woman's nervousness. "How interesting," he said, his voice taking on that icy tone she had seen the night before. "Because I don't remember having established such boundaries. In fact, I don't remember giving anyone permission to speak on my behalf." The tension in the air was palpable. The housekeeper could feel the silent war going on between the two, and she was at the center of it. But the housekeeper's words had planted seeds of doubt that were growing rapidly in her mind. "I need to check on the babies," she said abruptly, leaving the kitchen before either of them could answer. She ran up the stairs, her heart beating so hard that she was sure it could be heard throughout the mansion. When she reached the master bedroom, she found the wife awake, sitting in the armchair next to the makeshift crib where the 5 babies were sleeping. The elegant woman looked at her with an expression she couldn't decipher. There was weariness there, but also something more, a resignation that seemed to carry the weight of years of unhappiness. "Are you okay?" asked the housekeeper, trying to keep her voice natural. "As okay as anyone can be in this situation," replied the wife with a sad smile. "Sit down. I want to talk to you." The housekeeper hesitated, but sat on the edge of the bed. The 2 women were silent for a moment, watching the babies who were breathing peacefully. "You saved my life," the wife finally said, "and the lives of my children. That's why I feel I owe you the truth." "What truth?" "About my husband. About this marriage. About what really happened to his first wife." The housekeeper felt her blood run cold again. "You overheard our conversation in the kitchen." "I didn't need to. I know the housekeeper loves to spread that version of the story, but the truth is more complicated." The wife sighed deeply. "He didn't kill his first wife, but he blames himself for what happened to her every day." "I don't understand." "She was having an affair with his best friend, who was also a partner in his business. When he found out, he confronted them both. She was pregnant, but she didn't know if the child was his or her lover's." The wife's voice was low, but firm. "That day, she had decided to leave him to be with the other man. She was leaving when the accident happened." The revelation hit the housekeeper like a wave. "So, he didn't know. But he lost not only his wife and child, but also his company, his trust in people, his ability to love." The wife looked her directly in the eyes. "Until now." "What do you mean by that?" "I see how he looks at you, how he changes when you're around. For the first time in 5 years, he seems alive again." The wife took her hand. "I don't love him. I never have. This marriage was an arrangement, a way for both families to solve financial problems. But you, I'm just a housekeeper. You're the woman who saved him, who saved our family, and if there's a chance for him to be happy again, I won't stand in the way." The housekeeper pulled her hand away sharply. "You can't be serious." "I'm very serious, but there's something you need to know." The wife hesitated, as if making a difficult decision. "I'm sick. The doctor who came to examine me after the delivery found something in my tests. I need surgery, a very complicated surgery." "What kind of surgery?" "The kind that might not work." The answer came in a whisper. "That's why I want you to promise me one thing. If anything happens to me, take care of him. Take care of the babies. They'll need someone who really cares about them." At that moment, they heard footsteps in the hallway. The millionaire appeared at the door, his eyes going immediately to the housekeeper. There was something different in his expression, an urgency that wasn't there before. "I need to talk to you," he said. "Now." The wife gestured for her to go. "Go. Listen to what he has to say." The housekeeper stood up on trembling legs, following him out of the room. He led her to the study, closing the door behind them. When he turned to face her, she saw that his hands were shaking. "The housekeeper told you about my first wife, didn't she?" he asked bluntly. "Yes," she whispered. "And do you believe her version?" The housekeeper looked him in the eyes, searching for any sign of a lie, any indication that the suspicions might be true, but all she saw was pain, a deep, old pain that consumed him from the inside. "I don't know what to believe," she admitted. He approached slowly, stopping only when he was close enough for her to feel the heat of his body. "Then let me tell you the truth, all of it. And then you decide if you want to stay or leave forever." The millionaire walked to the study window, his back to her, as if he needed courage to speak. The housekeeper remained still, her heart beating so hard she was sure he could hear it. Outside, the mansion's garden shone under the morning sun, but inside that luxurious room, the shadows of the past seemed to dominate every corner. "I was 25 years old when I married her," he began, his voice low and filled with pain. "She was a girl from a wealthy family, beautiful, intelligent. I thought I was living a fairy tale. I built an empire for her, bought this mansion. I thought I could give her the whole world." He turned around, and she saw unshed tears glistening in his eyes. "But wealth doesn't buy fidelity. It doesn't buy true love. She started having affairs, first with men of our social class, then with anyone who gave her the excitement that I apparently couldn't provide." The housekeeper felt a strange ache in her chest. She didn't know if it was compassion for him or jealousy of a woman who had died years ago. "When I found out about the affair with my best friend, I confronted them both. She told me she was pregnant, but she didn't know if the baby was mine or his." He ran his hands through his hair, disheveling it for the first time since she had known him. That day, she decided she was leaving. She took the jewelry, the money she managed to access from our joint accounts, and left. "The accident," she whispered. "It happened on the road leading to the airport. The police said she was driving too fast, probably late for her flight." He approached her again, stopping very close. "I didn't kill her, but I blamed myself for years. If I had been a better husband, if I had paid more attention to her, if I had fought for our marriage." "You can't blame yourself for her mistakes," she said before she could stop herself. "Can't I?" He smiled bitterly. "My family thought differently. My father told me I'd ruined the company's reputation with the scandal. My mother blamed me for the loss of her first grandchild, and when my ex-best friend fled with a good portion of the company's investments, we almost went bankrupt." The housekeeper began to understand the magnitude of the tragedy that had shaped his life. That's why the arranged marriage. Exactly. A marriage without love, without emotional risks. She needed financial security, I needed social stability, and heirs to appease my family. He reached out, almost touching her face, but stopped at the last second. "Until you came along and messed up all my plans to live an emotionally empty life." Before she could respond, the study door opened abruptly. The housekeeper walked in without knocking, followed by two men in suits she didn't recognize. The millionaire quickly moved away from her, his expression changing to the cold mask of a businessman. "Sorry to interrupt," said the housekeeper with a fake smile, "but these gentlemen are from the company's internal audit. They would like to speak with you about some irregularities." The taller of the two men approached, extending an official document. "Sir, we have received anonymous reports of misappropriation of company funds for personal expenses. We need to verify some financial records." The housekeeper saw the color drain from the millionaire's face. "What kind of reports?" "Excessive spending on domestic staff, unauthorized payments, suspicious transfers." The man looked directly at her. "It appears someone is using company resources to benefit certain people close to the family." Her blood ran cold. Suddenly, everything made sense. The housekeeper hadn't been content just to spread rumors. She had orchestrated something much bigger and more destructive. "This is ridiculous," said the millionaire, but his voice betrayed nervousness. "All the expenses of this house are legitimate and approved by the board." "I'm sure they are," said the second man, opening a folder full of documents. "But we need to clarify a few points. For example, this payment of $50,000 in Bitcoin to an offshore account last month. What was it used for?" The housekeeper saw the millionaire swallow hard. She didn't understand anything about business or finance, but she realized that something was very wrong. "I can explain all these financial movements," he said, but his confidence had completely disappeared. "Great. Then let's go to your company now for a full audit." The first man turned to the housekeeper. "And you need to come with us too. Some of the transactions are related to your work here." My work? She stood up abruptly. I'm just a housekeeper. I don't know anything about his company. Maybe you don't know, said the housekeeper, approaching with a cruel smile. But there seem to have been some investments made in your name, applications in the stock market, transfers to accounts that didn't exist before you started working here more often. The accusation hit her like lightning. That's a lie. I never asked him for anything. Of course you didn't ask directly, the housekeeper continued, but men in love do crazy things, especially when they want to impress younger, poorer women. The millionaire turned to the housekeeper, and she saw real fear in his eyes. You need to believe me. I never... Sir, interrupted the first auditor, I recommend you make no further statements without the presence of a lawyer. Anything you say can be used against you in the criminal proceedings. Criminal proceedings. Her voice came out as a stifled cry. Misappropriation of corporate funds is a crime, explained the second man. The evidence suggests an elaborate scheme to transfer money from the company to benefit personal interests. If confirmed, it could result in imprisonment and total loss of assets. The housekeeper's mind was spinning. In a matter of minutes, her life had been turned upside down. From a woman discovering herself in an impossible situation, she had become an unwitting accomplice to a crime she didn't even know existed. I need to see my mother, she said desperately. I need to get out of here. I'm afraid that's not possible at the moment, said the first auditor. You are an important witness in the case. You cannot leave the city until everything is clarified. It was then that the millionaire's wife appeared at the door, leaning on the frame, still weak from the delivery. Her eyes went immediately to her husband, then to the housekeeper, and finally to the men in suits. What's going on here? She asked in a trembling voice. Your wife is not involved in this, said the millionaire quickly. Please, leave her out of this situation. All right, said the first auditor. But we need you both to come with us now. There is much to clarify. As they prepared to leave, the housekeeper looked one last time at the 5 babies who were sleeping peacefully in the makeshift crib. They didn't know that their lives were about to change drastically, that their father might go to jail, that the family fortune might disappear, that she herself might be considered a criminal. I believe in you, she whispered to the millionaire when the auditors weren't looking. Whatever happens, I believe in you. He held her hand for a brief moment, their fingers intertwined like a silent promise. I'll fix this. I'll protect you no matter what it costs. But as they left the mansion, followed by the curious glances of the other employees, the housekeeper couldn't shake the feeling that their lives had changed forever, and that perhaps this time not even love would be enough to save them from the storm that was just beginning. The housekeeper stood at the window, watching the cars drive away. Her satisfied smile revealed that this had been just the first move of a much larger plan. A plan that hadn't finished revealing itself yet. If you like this wonderful story, please comment giving a rating from 0 to 10. Your opinion is very important, and if you love beautiful stories, subscribe to my channel. I promise to make your day better with my videos.